are listening to the LWDG Pod Dog with me, Joanne Perrott. I am the founder of the Ladies Working Dog Group. Every single week I will be talking with our community about how you can improve your relationship with your dog and with a community of women just like you. Don't forget that you can win some prizes every single week with our giveaway. All you need to do to be in with a chance of winning is take a picture of yourself listening to this episode of the podcast, share it on your Instagram stories and tag us at the Ladies Working Dog Group. And if you want to, share your biggest takeaway from this episode with us too, because we'd love to hear what you think. Every single week we go through and we pick a winner and someone wins something exciting from our shop. But for now, enjoy this episode. You can do this and we are here to show you how. So let's get started. This week's Christmas Eve LWDG Pod Dog is brought to you on the topic of correction. We're going to let you listen in to one of our most popular webinars on the topic of correction and see how you feel after listening to it. Please let us know in the feedback and we wish you all a Merry Christmas. Welcome everybody to this evening's call. Like I said, it is going to be very, very busy. We are going to make sure we go through quite a lot with you. There is going to be a point of questions and answers, and when you're being asked anything, if you can put your answers in the chat. The chat is all set up so that it functions for everybody, and then the three ladies doing the webinar can go through it. So the featured experts that you have this evening are Emma Stevens, Claire Denia and Samantha Thorneycroft-Taylor. I'm sure you all know them really, really well by now. I want to make sure that we give our thanks right at the beginning and at the end, because, as I said, corrections is one of those topics where people find it a little bit taboo. The reason we wanted to do this webinar is we think there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding of what it even means. So I'm going to let the featured experts talk you through it, because I asked them to do it simply because I'm just as baffled as the rest of you are, okay? I don't know whether I should be correcting my dog, I shouldn't be correcting my dog, am I a bad owner if I correct my dog? I'm very, very, very confused. So these ladies are going to put things in perspective for us. Emma, if I can hand over to you to get started, and if you can just keep on admitting people for me, please.
Okay, so welcome everybody to this webinar that we're going to do on the science behind corrections. This webinar is not designed to tell you how to train, but instead we're going to give you the science behind all the methods to allow you to pick appropriate training tools, equipment and methods that you feel confident and comfortable using, teaching and using in a correction that will work for the dog that's in front of you. I'll hand over to Claire to talk a bit more about the dog that's in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. So dogs all have different temperaments, and as Em just touched on, what we're not here to do is advise individual people on how to correct their dog. As trainers, we work with the individual dog and owner in front of us all the time, taking into considering the dog's temperament, personality, whether they're sensitive dogs, and also what the owner is confident in and comfortable using as well. And what works for one dog and what one dog may deem a correction may not be a correction for another dog at all, which we're going to come on to much later on the webinar. But this is really just to give you an overview and understanding of what we're talking about when we use the word correction and the science behind that.
Thank you. So the first thing we're going to look at is we're going to ask you guys a question. So if you can open the chat box and make sure that it's to everybody so that we can see it. We'd really like to know what you think correction actually means. And this will help us then kind of go on to different parts of it. So if we give everybody just a couple of minutes just to write back what they think correction means. So we've got redirection, giving the dog an indicator that they've not done what you've asked, letting your dog... Sorry, I've just drawn on this screen. A consequence, pointing out to your dog when a behaviour is not expected quietly. An interruption. Oh God, these are great. These are coming in really quickly. Hang on, let me go back and try and...
Yeah.
Wow. If I've missed any, I'm really sorry. Stopping a dog doing something you don't want them to, a consequence, an interruption to something that the dog is already doing, resetting the dog and trying again, communicating with your dog. The dog has not done what you expected and you try to correct. These are great, guys. These are brilliant. Thank you. Correction for me feels like part of the learning process. So when I correct, I'm basically feeding back when something's gone wrong. If anybody else can everybody mute themselves, please, if they're just joining, that would be great. Thank you. So yeah, these are brilliant, guys. Removing the rewards the dog expects for its behavior, making it clear that what they are doing is what you don't want them to do, and trying to teach them what you do want. Okay, brilliant. So the Google definition, or a dictionary definition, is the act of making something accurate or better that is a change to fix a mistake or punishment to correct a fault, which means that the English language of the term correction is actually built around both nice and aversive ways of correction. Obviously, as trainers, we strive to be as nice as possible to the dogs. But as Claire said, what one dog finds nice, another dog may find aversive. So it's really important to know the science behind a correction so that you can make the right decision for the dog that's in front of you, and not just think, right, okay, treats are really nice, so therefore I'm going to use them for everything, when actually one dog might not like treats, and you might have to think of a different method of rewarding them to correct them nicely. So the terms that we're going to use tonight are nice and aversive. When we're talking about something that is actually a consequence to the dog. We're not going to use positive and negative, because we'll come on to that later, that they actually mean two completely separate things, okay? So nice and aversive is when it is either nice to the dog, so they have a pleasant experience, or aversive to the dog, so they have a not so pleasant experience. So a correction is now socially an accepted term that usually means aversive. When most people think of correction, most people think of something that they're going to cause harm or pain or suffering to the dog, and it doesn't have to be. So correction should also only be used if the dog fully understands that the behavior that's being asked of it. And this brings us on really nicely to teaching versus training. So again, they're two different terms, and it's really important that when you are training and teaching, you're very aware of the difference between the terms. So teaching is engagement with learners to enable understanding, application of knowledge, concepts, and processes. So it's teaching a new behavior that the dog is currently unaware of. So it means you can't correct them because they don't actually know what's right or wrong yet, because it's a new behavior that's being learned, okay? The methods that are commonly used are luring and shaping, and we'll come on to them in a little bit. But again, a question: when does luring stop being necessary and turn actually into what we call bribery instead, which again, we're going to come on to in the next slide as well. Versus training. So training is developing specific and useful knowledge, skills and techniques. And the key word here is develop. So it means they're already aware of it, and you're just furthering the dog's knowledge and education on that. So it could be the dog knows how to retrieve, so you start doing memory retrieves or blind retrieves, or you start building up the distance of scene retrieves. And that's developing that specific knowledge. And that's where you can use correction, and also methods of shaping and reward as well. If the dog doesn't necessarily do it right, there are multiple avenues that we can go down to make that exercise maybe easier because you've challenged them too much, or correct them and shape them into succeeding and doing the right thing. So it's building on existing known behaviors and checking understanding as well. So you're always constantly checking that the dog actually is understanding, so that you can build on those behaviors and make them better. So bribery, luring, and shaping. So I will hand you over to Claire to talk about bribery.
Yeah. So those people that know me well or watch my videos of me training my dogs, I use food when I train my dogs a lot. One of my dogs is extremely motivated, and one could take it or leave it, and one is not food motivated at all. But one of the common things that we see is when we've gone through the process of teaching a dog is not removing the lure quick enough. And I know Emma and Sam are going to talk about these bits in depth in a minute. But what we end up seeing is a lot of cases where the dog will not offer the behaviour unless the owner is holding the treat or the reward, whatever that would be, a tennis ball, in front of the dog. But the dog has learnt the behaviour, they've learnt the thing that we're teaching them, but they refuse to do it unless there's something on show. So that's bribing the dog. Now, the problem with bribes is that they will only work usually when the bribery is not outweighed by the other options available to the dog. So if, for instance, you're using a treat and the dog fully understands what the word sit means and can sit and does sit, and you've proofed that sit, but the dog refuses to sit unless you're holding a treat under its nose, then you're bribing the dog. But if the other options available to the dog, maybe chasing a squirrel or chasing a rabbit, outweigh that treat, then that bribery is going to fail you. So for me, you know, it's knowing whether you have trained the dog and you've proofed that training, and are you now trying to bribe the dog to get the result, as opposed to it being a trained response. Is that enough, Em? Happy with that?
Yeah. Thank you. So luring, Sam's going to talk about luring because she's just done a masterclass on it as well, where it covers it. So that's what she's going to talk about.
Thanks, Em. So yeah, as you sort of touched upon on the last slide, we tend to use luring when we're teaching a new behaviour, so a behaviour that the dog hasn't yet learnt, and we can use a treat in order to lure the dog into the correct position or to give us the correct behaviour. So for example, heel work, you would have the treat down, but you would use the lure to get the dog into the correct position, reward it for being in the correct position, and then you can sort of further it. So you move beyond position to moving on. So you could flood feed, lure with treats as you're walking along and keeping the dog in that correct position. For things like sit, you would more commonly pair the treat with the hand signal and then ultimately the verbal command as well. But for me, luring in the beginning, you don't necessarily give them that verbal command. They haven't learnt it. So we're teaching them the behaviour, the action that we want by use of a treat, and then making sure that we remove that treat soon enough that it doesn't become the bribe that Claire just spoke about. Is that all right, Em?
Yeah. The only other one that we've given an example for, because it's quite an easy one for people to visualize, is a spin. And this is where you really understand whether your dog's being lured or being bribed, because a spin is your hand eventually. So your hand signal would be doing that to make them spin, or but like that by their nose, basically. So you pair the treat with the body language to start with, then you add the verbal cue, and then when you remove the treat, the hand signal still does the same thing with the verbal cue, and then you can mess about with the verbal cue and taking the hand signals away and just having the verbal cue and things like that. But that's one that's really easy to visualize and test whether your dogs actually are being bribed or actually do value the reward that comes after the behavior. And that's when you start seeing, am I bribing my dog? Am I luring them and they just still don't understand it yet? Or are they waiting for, and can they wait for that treat to actually be delivered or that reward to be delivered? The other method that we talk about is shaping. So this is a series of steps to teach a new behavior, by segmenting them into small steps, so that your dog feels successful the whole way through. The way that the idea is that you have a lack of vocal commands, so the dog actually offers behavior, and we talk about offering behavior quite a lot, especially in gun dogs, because obviously we want them to choose to behave. We want them to choose to do the right thing, especially when they're put in environments that are so stimulating for them. We want them to choose to go for that retrieve in a field full of sheep. We want them to choose to pick the runner over the static birds on the floor. We want them to choose to sit steady with birds falling all around them. And we want them to choose to sit to flush when birds get up off the ground in a beating line, and not necessarily have a constant verbal command offering a wait or a stop to flush if you can't see them and things like that. So it's a lot of shaping, goes from very, very small stuff all the way through their training up to quite advanced gun dog work, is making sure that they're choosing to do the right thing all the time. Owners need to be quick and consistent with a reward, and mark the behavior at the right time for shaping to work. That's the biggest thing with it. A couple of examples of it is doorways, crates, and car, and food. So the way I shape food is a bowl of food would be lowered if a dog presents in a sit. If they stop presenting the sit and they get up or they try and jump at me, the food comes back up again. And they learn very, very quickly, if you're consistent and you reward the desirable behavior at the right time, that a sit means food comes down and moving means that food comes back up again. You can then translate that all the way through to your stop whistle. Once you've taught a stop whistle, you can shape a stop whistle, or a stop to flush or a stop to shot and things like that by the minute the dog has paired a stop to movement. They will then choose to stop to movement because the reward is more desirable than the chase. So there's just a few ways of teaching dogs, and obviously making sure that you're not going into this bribery aspect. Different rewards work for different dogs. And that's what we're going to touch into in a minute as well. So it's not just, you don't just bribe with food. You can bribe with toys. You can bribe with all sorts of things. And it's just making sure that you don't run the risk of going into that kind of bribery aspect. But luring and shaping are very nice ways, because obviously we're not talking about positive, because that means something different. They're very nice ways to train dogs. And they're the ways that are commonly used, and becoming more and more commonly used as well. So another thing that we're going to delve into is the quadrants of training. And these science terms are going to factor basically what we talk about tonight as well. So lots of you will have heard of these before: positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, and negative punishment. What we're going to do tonight is show you that actually there are nice and aversive methods of every single quadrant. You could be a very nice R+ trainer, or you could also be quite an aversive R+ trainer, depending on how you use the equipment and how you introduce it to the dog. And that's the key message that the three of us tonight kind of wanted to get across to everybody, is that all four of these quadrants can work together separately, and for individual dogs, if you choose the nicer versions of them rather than the aversive versions of them. So what do the words mean? So this is why we're not using positive and negative tonight, because positive means adding. So it means adding something. Negative means removing something. So your add could be the addition of a treat, or the addition of body language, or the addition of a piece of equipment that could be aversive or nice. Negative is the removal of it. So the removal of pressure, the removal of food, the removal of a dog out of a certain environment. That's negative. Reinforcement is to increase a behavior. So you're adding something or removing something to increase the behavior. Your punishment is the opposite. So you're, again, going to add something or remove something to decrease the behavior. Now, what we've done is we've gone through positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, negative punishment in detail with examples, so that everybody can kind of see them working in a realistic environment as well. So negative and punishment in behavior terms does not mean causing pain, harm, or suffering to the dog. Okay, they're not the words that scientifically a behaviorist would use. Aversive means causing harm, pain, and suffering. Negative does not, and punishment does not. Okay, so that's a real key bit to take away from the webinar tonight, is when actually people are talking about negative punishment or negative reinforcement, they're talking about adding something or removing something to increase or decrease a behavior. Okay, so examples. So positive reinforcement. So this is adding something to increase a behavior. So the green ones are nice ones. So we've got two nice ones there. So rewarding a dog when it recalls. So you add the reward to increase the dog's behavior and likelihood to recall in the future. Reward a dog when it's told to sit. You're adding the reward to increase the dog's behavior to sit. So it offers the behavior again, or it does the behavior again when it's asked to. A not so nice one, so an aversive one, is a scruff of a dog to make them steadier. So when you throw something, you scruff your dog to hold it in position. So the addition bit is your body language. So you're adding the scruff, the physical contact on the dog, to increase a dog's steadiness. Okay, so that again, you can manipulate your training methods to actually cover positive reinforcement, which not a lot of people are necessarily aware of. Again, what is a reward? We've touched on reward a few times. So these are some of the examples that we've come up with. So food, toys, physical praise, verbal praise, release or freedom, and then retrieving and hunting as well can be used more for obviously gun dogs as their reward. So positive punishment. Claire, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, sure. So with positive punishment, we're adding something to decrease the behaviour. So we came up with a couple of nice ones and we came up with one not so nice one, so an aversive one. So we said that you could add a long training line for the recall. So by adding the long line, we're decreasing the lack of the recall with the dog. Okay, so a long line is adding something to decrease the dog being able to not recall. The owner retrieving a dog when they don't listen. So very similar to when we talked just now about using your own body language to reduce the dog's ability to self-reward. So going to get the dog when they don't recall. So that's us adding in ourselves, going out and getting the dog to reduce the likelihood of them ignoring the recall again. And then our not so nice one, and it's not a nice one, ear pulling to make a dog be quiet. So, you know, you might find that some trainers might find that it's okay to pull the dog's ear to actually reduce the dog making a noise. Okay, so if they're in an exciting environment, rather than walking the dog away or something like that, they might add in actually an ear pull to make the dog be quiet, to reduce the noise that the dog is offering.
I just want to add, while we're explaining these are just examples that the three of us came up with. Then examples that we necessarily use, advocate, promote, or anything like that. They're just examples so that you guys can understand the 4 quadrants effectively, and that they can be used in a nice way, or they can be manipulated into a more aversive way of training as well.
Yes.
Sam, do you want to do negative reinforcement?
Yep. So negative reinforcement then is the removal of something to increase the behavior. So just to go over what we've said before, in this scenario, negative does not mean something bad. It literally just means taking something away. So we've again come up with 2 nice examples of what could be negative reinforcement. So we've got the removal of a bowl of food when a dog breaks from a sit position. So we want the dog to remain in its sit while we put its food bowl down until we release it to eat its food, for example. If the dog comes away from the sit, if it stands up, if it dives into its food and we take that food away, taking the food away is the negative. And then the reinforcement there is to increase the behavior of the dog staying in a sit. We've also got picking up a retrieve by hand if a dog runs in. So if we want our dog to be steady on that retrieve, and when we've thrown the retrieve or placed the dummy out, the dog then runs in before we've sent it. If we pick it up by ourselves, then the negative bit is the removal of the retrieve to help the dog understand, to help it increase its steadiness. When you wait, when you sit patiently when I've asked you to, then you are going to get your reward of your retrieve. And then we've also got a aversive one as well, which would be the removal of pressure of a prong collar when a dog is calmly at heel. So prong collars are used still in various parts of the world, but the removal of the pressure would be the negative, the taking away, to then increase the frequency of the calm heel work. So that's then the reinforcement.
Thank you. So again, just to make everybody aware, we're not promoting any of these methods or anything like that. They are just examples for you to think about when thinking about the methods of training. So negative punishment is the removal of something to decrease a behavior. So the 2 nice examples that we've got of this is ignoring a dog by removing a reward when it makes a noise. You remove the contact and that decreases the noise. putting the lead away if a dog jumps up at you. So I know in the Dog and Duck, we've spoken about lots of dogs getting very excited when the lead comes out. If you put the lead back away and the dog calms back down, the idea is that removal of the equipment decreases the excitement. You bring it back out, eventually it will swap over into another quadrant because you'll bring the lead out and the dog will remain calm. The not so nice one, and one again that is still commonly used in the UK and across the world as well, unfortunately, is so the removal of a mouth clamp to decrease the dropping of the dummy. So the way a mouth clamp works is that you would put pressure around the dog's nose to hold them holding a dummy. So they've got the dummy in the mouth, you hold their nose closed until they hold the dummy sufficiently, and then you remove the pressure to increase the duration of the hold. Okay. And again, just because these examples are on here does not mean that we commonly use them. They're just examples for you to rack your brain around and have a think about. So back at so what we're then going to talk about is interrupters again. So again, an interrupter is another method of correction, and you can have aversive interrupters and nice interrupters as well. So what we again want you guys to do is a little bit of audience participation and tell us whether you feel that these interrupters are nice or aversive. Okay, so bird noise. I'm just going to bring the chat box back up so that I can hear. So bird noise, so commonly used when you throw a dummy around, so people make a brrr, that kind of noise. But lots of people will also use it as an interrupter. If a dog runs out on something and you want them to actually turn around and focus on you, they'll make that noise because obviously they're anticipating that it's been paired with a retrieve in the past. So nice or aversive? Go.
Go.
We're getting lots of nice, not lots of nice.
Yeah.
Okay, how about if I told you...
Game show.
Depends on the dog. Okay, brilliant. That's great. Okay, so now if I told you that actually every time I made that bird noise, I was going to hit my dog on the nose. Now, do you think that interrupter is nice or aversive? So same noise, just different paired. Okay, fab. This is really what we want. So aversive. Yeah, brilliant. I'm not going to hit my dog, by the way, just to put that out there. Okay, brilliant. Aversive. Fab. Okay. Right. Starter pistol. Go. Go, guys, go. Nice. Depends on the dog.
Yep.
Depends.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Nice. Okay. Depends on the dog. Depends on the dog. Depends on the dog. Okay, we're starting to get, same before. Brilliant. Okay. We're starting to get people understanding. So again, a starter pistol, if I've always paired a starter pistol with a retrieve and my dog loves a retrieve, 100% that's a lovely interrupter. If my dog goes off self-hunting and I let a shot off, it's going to come running back to me because it thinks it's getting a retrieve. But we all know I had a gun-shy dog. That starter pistol not being paired with a retrieve and being paired with something that happened to him before I had him, 100% was a negative was an aversive for him. So again, yeah, depends on the dog. Squeaking noise. So I don't even know how to make a squeaking noise. Somebody else make a squeaking noise. Yeah.
So my dog's just come over. She thinks it's nice.
So yeah, brilliant. Okay, guys are starting to say depends on what it's paired with. So again, you can have very, very noise sensitive dogs, and a squeak could be the most terrifying noise to them in the world, or it can be something that's I mean, if you make a squeaking noise to my terriers, they think it's a rat and they go absolutely ballistic. So yeah, 100%. It depends on the dog, the situation. Lots of dogs find it a very exciting noise. But again, some very noise sensitive dogs can find it very aversive as well. Or or a verbal interrupter. So or oi or something like that. Go. Aversive for my dog, aversive for my dog, aversive for my dog, aversive, neutral, aversive, works for mine, both again. Depends, some words on, some words aren't. Okay, fab. So again, a verbal interrupter is very, very commonly used across all training, gun dogs and in the dog sports world as well. Sam, do you want to talk about a verbal interrupter very quickly?
Yeah, happy to. Sorry, let me get rid of that bit. So I will, in theory, I do use interrupters quite frequently, because I think you can use them both when you're initially training something, but you can also use them to interrupt a behavior that's not what you want. So if I'm teaching recall to a really young puppy, for example, and the puppy has lost focus on me, it's having a bit of a sniff around, it's not too far away, and I want to recall it, but it doesn't yet know the recall command, then I will use something like a brrrt or a just to get that puppy to look at me. So I've interrupted what it's doing. And then when it's looking at me, I can then use nice inviting body language. I can crouch down and then recall the puppy when it's on its way back to me. I can also use it if I know a dog knows what I'm asking of it. If I've sent it on a retrieve, for example, but for whatever reason it's taken the wrong line, I can use something like an which in that sense basically just means, excuse me, that wasn't what I was asking of you, or come on now, think about this. And then again, I can change my body language. Once I got that dog's focus back on me, I can either bring it back to me and set it up and start again, or I can change or adapt what it's doing, adapt what it was doing that I needed to interrupt in the first place. So for me, definitely interrupters, verbal interrupters can be nice or aversive, depending on the situation, the scenario, and the dog in front of you.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, some dogs, if you went at to them, they'd crawl across the ground on their belly to you. Yeah. Some dogs wouldn't even take 2 notices of you at all. They'd carry on doing what they were doing. So yeah, verbal interrupters, they're always the one that kind of we had a lot more there go more aversive than actually depends on the dog. So, but 100%, it's still any of your interrupters will depend on a dog, and how you've then paired them and what's come after the or oi. If you've gone and chased your dog down, grabbed it by the scruff and dragged it back, 100% the next time that happens, it's probably going to kind of crouch down and show some submissive body language. But if you've gone the dog's looked at you and you've turned your body language into very nice, inviting, come back to me and we're going to try again behavior, the dog is more likely to listen to that again the second time round as a nice interrupter.
Definitely. And if I can just add in there, I think it was Kerry just said in the chat, it also depends on what emotion, what body language you add to it. And it does completely. And you can also, if you've got a new puppy in the house, for example, and it doesn't yet know the leave command, but it's about to pick up and chew your computer cable, then you can use that interrupter just to help it stop in its tracks slightly. So we're also using it for the dog's safety in some cases. We can't say leave it like we could to an older dog that we'd already taught that command to, because that young puppy doesn't yet know it. But we can use it just for the puppy to then go, oh, sorry. Oh yeah, okay, I'm focused on you now. Let's go and play. And then I've sort of forgotten about the computer cable that I was about to chew on.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, next one is a clap, which I know lots of people use for very different things as well as interrupters. I know lots of people that use them for recall and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see what people think of a clap, whether it's a positive, a nice or an aversive. Depends. Aversive to mine. Okay, brilliant. It's nice that people are starting to say what it is to their own dog as well, because it actually means that you're starting to really think about how it affects your own dog and whether it's actually scary or nice to them. Fab. Okay, so yeah, same, very, very similar again. If you've always clapped, and I know my mum's got pups at the moment, and they clap before they put the food down, so to get the pup attention and get them all up and moving and things like that. So to them, a clap will always be a positive because it means food. It's almost like ringing a bell for them till it'd be like dinner time. Whereas some dogs, you could clap and again, noise sensitivity will make them absolutely terrified of that clap and they'll run a mile from you. And yeah, again, Kerry, yeah, you can add emotion to a clap as well. You can clap and change your body language for it to be an aversive interrupter as to stop doing that, or it can be a clap to actually pay attention and come back to me.
I like what Philly said. Mine would have seen it as a round of applause for being silly.
Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Repetitive whistling. What do we think of that? Nice or aversive? By repetitive whistling, we mean like repeating the 3 pips on the whistle like over and over again, or to get attention and things like that.
Okay.
Annoying. I think that in our preview of what we were doing on tonight.
The whistle is broken. I like this. We should have done prizes for these answers, you know.
Waste of time encourages dog to ignore the handler. Okay, fab. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It becomes very, very white noise to the dog. It can become confusing. So yeah, I think it can be very nice. I've done some kind of guided retrieving where we're constantly blowing the whistle to get the dog to understand to come in, but there's gaps obviously between it, to teach obviously a dog to come in. Handler frustration, I love that. Please come back.
Hurry.
But yeah, and I think it can be, and it depends on obviously how you teach it. With all of the commands, you obviously heavily use commands when you're teaching, and then when you're training, some of those commands drop off. So for me, I'd expect as soon as my dogs have got a retrieve, I shouldn't need to recall them, because they know by that point that as soon as something's in their mouth, they immediately come back into me. But yeah, I think repetitive whistling, although we're talking about not necessarily whether it works or doesn't work, but whether it is nice to the dog or aversive to the dog, whether it works or not at this point, sort of not really the point. But does it work as an interrupter? I don't know. Some dogs, yes, some dogs, no. But is it nice or aversive to that dog? Some dogs, yes, 100%. It will help them understand what's being expected of them and come in. And some dogs, it will be aversive, not because they choose to ignore it, but because they're very noise sensitive and actually it scares them and it doesn't make them want to come into you because you're making a hell of a lot of racket blowing a whistle at them. So again, it's how you introduce it to the dog. Pet corrector. Nobody's dead comment yet. Okay, so a pet corrector, for anybody that doesn't know, is you can get it in, you can buy them. They're like tins of kind of, what are they, like pressure basically, that when it goes
compressed air. Compressed air.
Compressed air, that was it. That's what I'm looking for, Claire, thanks. When you squeeze it or press the button, it basically makes a very, very loud noise. Or you can get like stones in a bottle, that kind of thing. Often they are used to interrupt a dog maybe jumping up or barking or something like that. And I'm assuming that's why we're getting a lot of aversives, and no, don't ever use them. And again, Cindy would be an aversive, but I guess you compare it with something positive. And actually, I'm going to just hand over to Claire to just talk about that a little bit more as well. We've got a dedicated slide for pet corrector in a minute, but yeah, I'll let Claire talk about it now quickly.
Yeah, so like with anything, it's all about how it's paired, and I actually carry one out on walks in case I get an aggressive dog come at my dog. So I have desensitized my own dog to the pet corrector, so that I have a means. I'd probably use it on a human as well if I needed to. Not that they'd be particularly bothered by a puff of air. But it's all about perspective on how you use these things, and having a dog that has been attacked personally and wanting to protect my own dog. With all of these things, you can actually desensitize your own dog, pair it with something good, so that you can use it effectively for other methods. But that goes, we're going to talk about the tin can, aren't we, later with the biscuit tin. So, yeah.
That goes on nicely. So, tin can, what do people think? So it's very similar to a pet corrector. It's obviously just one that you can kind of make at home. So Cindy just said, I know someone who used to teach a recall with a dog. So yeah, it's things like And we won't go too much into it because we have got another slide on it. But again, these kind of correctors and tin cans, although they are commonly used as an aversive to prevent a behaviour by Esther, the aversive by a manner of use, they're commonly used to prevent dogs doing behaviours that you don't want them to do. They're used as a deterrent rather than an interrupter. But actually, if paired in the correct way to the dog and introduced in the correct way to a dog, they can actually be quite a nice interrupter as well, and can really, really help some dogs as well. The last one, a very, very controversial one, e-collar. Remember, guys, an e-collar has a vibrate mode and an electric mode on there. So it'd be interesting to see what people think, whether this is nice or aversive.
That's okay. Leave it.
Aversive. Okay. The vibration can be more aversive to a shock. For some dogs, the vibration's fine. Aversive, but again, the vibrate mode could help. Vibrate colour with a deaf dog, no trouble once paired with food, never the electric. I'm thinking of having a vibrate for my deaf dog. Okay, brilliant. So that brings us on to an e-collar. So I have used an e-collar on the vibrate mode. I haven't used one on the electric mode to teach a client with a deaf dog, and about it, we used it basically for recall, but then we actually branched out into actually different bits as well. So we paired it very similar to a clicker, but obviously the dog can't hear a clicker, can't hear a whistle. So firstly, we did a very similar method to muzzle training to actually place the collar on the dog so that the dog was happy having the collar on. We didn't actually put it right around the dog's neck to start with. We just put it right up against the skin without it actually being tied on. And just vibrated it on a very, very low setting. And every time we vibrated, we treated. And then what we started to do was we started to leave the collar on in the house all the time without any vibrating happening or anything like that, just so that the dog became very accustomed to the collar being on. And it took a long time before we actually started using the vibrate mode. And every single time we used the vibrate, it was at very, very close proximity. It was one vibrate and a treat instantly. That single vibrate very quickly became a sit whistle, or very similar to a stop. And 3 vibrates then very quickly became a recall. And the dog actually ended up being able to still work. It was a gun dog that was near retirement, but still had a bit of drive in him. But unfortunately had gone deaf, and he still carried on working because they could recall him, they could stop him. When he stopped, he looked for them, and then he could be redirected. And he just didn't range too far. That he went out of sight and things like that. So, but he could still actually work for his owner quite nicely. So just showing, I know it's not on the electric mode, but it is on the vibrate, that actually if you pair it with something nice to the dog, that piece of equipment saved that dog having to go into an early retirement and making life very difficult and on a lead for the rest of its life when it had been a working gun dog, but also kept that relationship with its owner, being able to work in the field as well. So just shows that not necessarily, I know e-collars are a huge topic that we won't even attempt to branch into in mass detail tonight, because it's a completely different way of training, and one that I don't think any of us have used an e-collar on the electric mode. I think some of us have used them on the vibrate mode, but not on the electric either. So, but just to go into a little bit of detail about them, an e-collar is predominantly seen as a positive punishment. So it's adding something to reduce a behaviour. So you add the shock to reduce a bad recall is the common way, usually in the UK, that they're actually used for. So it's a dog with very high prey drive that chases deer or livestock or anything like that, and they're shocked to tell them to come back. Obviously that may or may not work for that dog, and there are obviously other methods that you could prevent prey drive and things like that from happening as well. But just to add on to that, the other method of teaching a dog to not obviously chase livestock and come back to you and things like that, is also another positive punishment, which is adding a long line and a harness to a dog as well, because you're still adding equipment to reduce the bad recall. They can be used, though, as both a positive punishment and a negative reinforcement, okay, based on your timing of use. So they can be used to add a shock until a good behavior is seen, and then the shock is removed, okay? So you would add the shock until the dog stops running after something, and then the shock's removed, okay? So that's how they're used in both of those two quadrants, just as an example, okay? We're not obviously telling anybody that they need to use an e-collar or they should use an e-collar. We're just telling you from the science terms, what quadrant they fit under the e-collar, okay? Again, if you paired an e-collar with a verbal marker of food, you're obviously using it as a positive reinforcement, because you're adding something to increase a behavior. So when I talked about the deaf dog that had an e-collar paired with marker with a verb with food for a recall, you're obviously using it as a positive reinforcement, because that dog learned to have a better recall because of the shock, okay, or because of the vibrate. And using noise to train. So depending on the training methods, a noise, or like what we were talking about with the interrupters, is actually a positive punishment, and that goes all the way down to a clicker, because you're adding something. So you're adding a piece of equipment to adding a piece of equipment, okay? So a positive punishment, rattle to interrupt a behavior and then reward, but it can also be a positive reinforcement, adding something to increase a behavior, and this is what Claire's going to talk about now.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was we spent quite a lot of time talking about this, didn't we, when the three of us were discussing all of this, because noise interrupt can actually be very beneficial for some dogs if the owner's voice has become like white noise. And we're not talking about frightening the dog, we're not talking about scaring the dog or being harsh, but sometimes a noise, whether that be a clap or whether that be the or whatever it is, the tin can is one of those, the pet corrector could be deemed of one of those. It's a noise that the owner's word, like a so that the owner can then give them something good to do to reward the dog. However, all of those things can be paired with something really good. So if you took, for example, something like the tin can, the rattle can, but somebody has been using a tin box of treats or biscuits to call their dog in from the garden, well, what you've got there is something very, very, very nice. Nearly used the wrong word then, guys. Something very nice. What the dog hears that noise and pairs it with something really exciting. I come in and I get these cookies out of this tin. So we really have to look at the training methods behind how any piece of equipment is used or applied, and how the dog will deem that based on the history of the dog, the relationship with the owner, personality of the dog, which is why we said at the beginning, like, this specific webinar is to talk about the science behind it and how things can be used, as opposed to saying this is what you should use, because it will always depend on the way it's introduced and on the personality of the dog, the history of the dog, the history of the relationship between the dog and the owner as well. And that's really important to remember. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it takes us on really nicely, Claire, to like the appropriate use of all these 4 quadrants when you're training. And hopefully now we've kind of given everybody that's watching tonight basically that all of these quadrants can be used in a nice way or an aversive way, depending on the dog that's in front of you and how you pair it and what you pair it with, basically. So on that, I just want to see if anybody in the chat box is happy enough to kind of, if they want to, just give us any kind of thoughts that have maybe changed their mind on certain bits of equipment, or how they would train and use different bits of equipment, before we go on to any kind of live questions, and I'll stop sharing the screen for that.
Well, Becky is just typed, which is basically what you've just said, Emma. But a clicker is a condition reinforcer and is a neutral stimulus, though. But anything is neutral until we pair it. You know, that's what Emma was just described as. Whatever that thing is, and it depends how it's introduced and how it's paired and what it's followed up with, is whether the dog will deem that nice or not.
So, like, if you just did a clicker and nothing else happened, depending on the dog in front of you, because they've never heard that noise before, if you've got a very confident dog, they might find it quite a nice noise and not be that bothered by it. But if you've got a very noise sensitive dog, a clicker with nothing after it could be a very scary noise to them. And the same with a tin can or a pet corrector. But it's how we then pair it that then falls into these quadrants. So if you clicked and then did something that was harsh to the dog or aversive, it would fall into a different quadrant. If you paired something then with something nice, it would then fall into a different quadrant, if that makes sense.
That's nice, Flo. We've had a couple of comments there. There was a comment just, I've gone too far. Where did it go? Something about a golden retriever.
This is confirmed about the challenges I had with my rescue golden retriever. I had no idea what his learning history was. The rescue had no history on his previous life. Lots of things I viewed I was being nice and he saw as aversive.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting as well, is when you get a dog that you don't actually have any history of, what you may deem as actually, I'm being really nice, I'm trying to be nice to them, they may actually see as a really scary thing, or something that's really aversive, and it's not actually, you're not doing it deliberately. It's just that dog that's in front of you.
And what Becky has said, but a clicker is a predictor of reward or punishment, not a reward or punishment. So it doesn't fit into the quadrant. The fact that you're adding the clicker means it has to be in one of the two positive quadrants, because you're adding a piece of equipment or you're adding something in. And then that's what we've said before about how many things can cross over between the two quadrants, because you can either use it to increase a behavior, so you could use the clicker and the reward to increase or speed up the speed of a sit, or you could use the clicker to bring the dog's focus back to you and stop it disappearing off after the pheasant, so you're then decreasing the behavior of it running off after the pheasant. So it could be it could be a positive reinforcer, or it could be a positive punishment.
Yeah.
Correct. Flo's just said, very informative and open me to be non-judgmental until you actually understand how people are pairing their training. That's lovely, Flo. That's great, which is really what we were trying to achieve tonight as well. And then Esther said, I really like the way you used the e-collar for death. I always thought of it as a big no, but it actually could be used as a positive enforcer. Yeah. Bob has said, I'm having trouble scrolling, guys. Sorry. My thing's shooting up and down like this. I'm like, ugh. Help. What did Bob say? Where's Bob gone?
Have you got it? So Bob said, I guess, sorry, you go.
No, it's okay. I was just
Okay, so Bob said, I guess we need to balance the use of each quadrant relative to our dog. And exactly that. Yeah. And that's what we sort of wanted to get across, in that because the words negative and positive are used, but actually they're not seen as to how they were meant in the first place, which is why I think it's important. Negative literally just means taking something away, and positive literally just means adding something in. And it is exactly that, finding that balance and finding what your dog needs, what you need, and reading all the body language and the scenarios and everything as well, and using what applies best to your dog in that particular scenario at that particular moment in time, rather than getting too caught up on the fact that the word negative and punishment is used, because it's not actually a bad thing.
Yeah,
Sorry,
exactly.
Em, back to you.
No, Louise has just written, it feels like all the methods are so relevant. The trick is knowing what works best for the dog in front of you. I think that's the biggest challenge. The worry is doing something to correct and inadvertently causing an aversive, or she's written negative, but I'm assuming she means aversive for the dog. I'm reminded of what you said earlier about whether the dog actually understands the command as well. And that's another big key message as well, is actually, if you need to correct, you also then have to look back. Does my dog understand? Because if I've had to correct, is my dog choosing to do wrong because something else is more exciting, or the environment is more stimulating, or whatever the pull is to choose to do wrong? But equally, have you actually taught them to choose the right one, the right method, the right training bit that you want them to do, the right behavior? Because if you haven't actually taught them the right behavior, you can't expect them to choose right. And even when they choose wrong, they're not necessarily choosing wrong, they're just making a choice. So it's really important to, although we've obviously spent a lot of time on these quadrants, to actually go right back to the first slides that we showed you guys and actually think about the teaching versus training. And you shouldn't need to use correction when you are teaching, but correction will need to be used when you are training. And it's then looking at, right, how do I correct? Do I use positive reinforcements? Do I use positive punishments? Do I use negative reinforcements, or do I need to use negative punishments? And we've gone through 2 examples of all of them that are deemed as nice. But again, a harness and a long line might be terrifying for a dog, and that is a positive punishment. And equally, there's other methods as well that you could use that could be really scary to a dog that actually you think are quite nice. So it's just, again, thinking about the dog that's in front of you.
I agree. And I think the thing is, I think people have become afraid to use the word correction, and afraid that correction is such a negative thing, and it's like, if the dog has learned it, if you don't like the word correction, education, for me, I talk a lot, I educate my dogs all the time as to what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And we do that for their safety. And I think, that's the thing. It's looking at what you're doing, and you're doing it for the safety and the well-being of your dog at the end of the day.
So a couple of people have asked about lead checks. So a lead check may be nice or aversive, depending on how the dog responds to it. In terms of the science side of it, it's technically a positive punishment, because you're adding the check on the lead to reduce the behavior of the dog pulling. So from that point of view, that's what quadrant it fits into. Whether your dog can or cannot cope with it is totally dependent on that dog. And that's why we touched at the start saying that we're not going to obviously offer advice of whether you should or shouldn't do these, or should or shouldn't use them. We are just here tonight to show you that all 4 of these quadrants can be used as effectively and in a nice way, depending on obviously the dog that's in front of you. So some dogs tolerate a slip lead and a lead correction very, very well. And if your timing's correct, it will have a very good impact on heel work. And some dogs absolutely melt to the ground and can refuse to walk and find it very, very stressful and very aversive, in which case you'd be looking at a different method of heel work training. So it's that, again, is not kind of what we were here to describe tonight, is whether you should or shouldn't lead correct. It was more that this is where it falls into in a science-based way. Should you or should you not use it is dependent on the dog in front of you, and what you're comfortable training and what the dog can tolerate as well.
I had a feeling that the lead thing was going to come up tonight, because it's such a common one, isn't it? Because dogs pull on a lead. And I actually, what you've just said, Em, and I actually wrote down what you've just said, and I actually wrote, but that if you take away the pressure of the lead, then the dog is responding to the pressure because the dog's responding to that in a distracting place. So it's whether the dog deems the correction the pressure on or the pressure off, as the nice or not nice.
Yeah, because obviously the pressure coming off is a negative reinforcement.
Correct.
Because you're obviously taking the pressure away to increase the likelihood of the dog staying at heel, but your pressure on of your lead check is your positive punishment. Yeah. So the timing of those obviously fall into two quadrants, and that's why we wanted to come on tonight and explain this, because lots of people misuse the word positive and negative, and they see it as nice or aversive, and they don't know probably enough about these quadrants to be able to know whether what they're doing is nice or aversive. So hopefully that's kind of what we've given everybody tonight.
Nadine has said, yes, education, brilliant. And Esther has said, timing and method of use and of every tool. So key to understand our training. Skinner and Pavlos remain with us.
It's also, someone said further up, and I can't remember who it was, but they'd said also about sort of emotions and body language and tone of voice. So not only have we got the adding and the removal of pieces of equipment, but we do have to use our being into those quadrants as well. So we can add a good or a I can't think of the word I want, not good tone. Just, we can, even without saying anything, we can be both nice and aversive. So whoever it was that said it, Kerry, I think it was, that said it, it is exactly that. You've got the four quadrants, but we can put ourselves in those quadrants as well. And as we've said earlier, girls, it's understanding what those four quadrants mean and having a clear picture in your own mind to then be able to apply it to the situation in front of you and the dog in front of you as well.
Correct.
I've just scrolled up and Becky said, does this method cross into creating neural pathways? So I'll just touch a little bit about neural pathways. So obviously anytime you do something, you're trying to create a behavior pattern. Anytime you want to teach them a new method, you create a behavior pattern, and any of the quadrants that you decide to use will create that behavior pattern if you are consistently doing it over and over and over again at the right time, with the dog behaving in the correct way, or the way that you want them to behave over and over again. So all four of these quadrants, if used consistently, depending on obviously what you're teaching and what you're trying to achieve, will create a neural pathway of some description, whether that's nice or aversive. I hope that kind of answers what you said.
Emma's passed control back to me now, so that I get to pull the funny face when I'm ending it. I'd like to give a big round of applause. You can come off mute if you want, and all give a big round of applause to the ladies, because I think you absolutely nailed it, as I would think you would, because you are absolutely brilliant. And for everybody, thank you for your time. We really do appreciate it. We hope you come along to our next webinar, and we hope to see you soon. Have a lovely evening all. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.